Okay, so next what we're gonna do is we're gonna finish out Justin's face by pulling up, rendering the frontal bone, which establishes our shape of our forehead, and then also the temporal regions. The temporal bones sit behind each of the sides of the head. And then the base of the frontal bone and edges of the zygomatic arch are going to help us finish out the eye socket shape. And then finally, what we'll do is we will set the eyes into those sockets. So let's start with that frontal bone. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just confidently reassert that measurement for the upper third of the face. Remember what we did was we used that measurement from nasion, middle of the eyebrows, down to vomer. And what I found before was that if I pulled that measurement up once on Justin, that was getting me right to the base of his hairline, or top of his face, at the center of the forehead. So I'm just going to reassert that measurement, double checking it. On my drawing, it hasn't moved. It shouldn't, but you know, sometimes as you're working, you can lose one measurement and sort of compensate as you go. So it's always good to recheck those early ones. All right. Like we've done many times before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that line of the nasion and extend it out, and I'm going to make my first measurement for the width of his head through that upper third along that same horizontal line. So I'll erase my measuring stick, roll it so I have a fresh start. And we kind of run into the ears, so I'm just gonna move inside that facial shape. I'm gonna first stop at the sideburns. This is just kind of a choice that I'm making because I'm seeing a really nice high contrast edge. You may have more kind of hair in the way, or there might be another more clear sort of limit or edge that you'd rather measure from, and that is just fine. At this point, you're just kind of using judgment of based on what the image is giving you. But that is kind of high contrast movement as we move from the skin of the forehead to the brown hair of the sideburn seemed helpful, and it was in the same line as that nasion, so I have placed that symmetrically. We will get that sideburn shape sort of dipping in. That is not the limit of his head, it's just the edge of his face at that moment. All right. Now what I think I might do is I could make a few more measurements to start getting the ears in place. I think I'll probably just make one more at this moment, just to reach out to the edges of the ear cartilage along that line. So now I'm all the way out to the right edge of the ear. I'm going to find center and then pull out to the left edge. It's just below the top of them. But that just gives me, again, that limit along that height of the nasion. All right. As we can see, we might want to move up just slightly. The edges with his haircut, edges of his head are staying fairly straight. The roundness of the cranium is usually rounder towards the top, so that's not unusual. But also haircut kind of helps define that head shape or disguise the head shape quite often. So we'll just sort of follow what we see again. Looking at this as we kind of move up from the ears, it is going to get narrower. So I'm going to pick a height maybe just at the top of the eyebrows to do my measuring from. So I'm at the right edge of the head, center. and pulling back over to the left edge. I'm gonna give myself other marks just for hair too. And I'll pull that over to Justin. Since it feels like, at least at that point, that edge stays pretty straight, I'm just gonna drop it at the point that I think it belongs. Okay. And so now I've started to establish the width of his forehead, or upper part of his cranium, based on those widths. All right. Now the next thing that we will do is we can sort of nuance and define the hairline a little bit. It travels up fairly straight off the sideburns, then it's going to come in a little. We also have a roundness. You could measure this as much as you want with your measuring stick with the same model we've done, but you can also, you know, just use a simple sort of block in, and based on observation back and forth from image to drawing, you can establish that as well. And maybe a little bit more swiftly. You can always double check those sighted decisions with your measuring stick. I did pretty well. All right. The next thing that I'm going to do just quickly before I go back to structure is I'll go ahead, because I think it's going to help me see. I'm going to measure from nason to the very top of Justin's hairdo. And he's got a lot of hair gel or something going on, so we get a lot of volume coming off there. So I'm just going to put that in really sort of quick, just to give me with a bit of context and familiarity of shape as I refine the shapes below, which I'm going to do now. All right, first step I'm going to do is I'm going to, the forehead is a projecting plane, as we talked about in the PowerPoint. It's kind of part of our natural visor. The eyes are set behind it so that as sweat drops off your brow, it falls in front of your more vulnerable opening of your eyes. So because it sticks out, light is likely to find it. And it's also likely going to cast a bit of shadow into that second shape below. So right, I brought it in that front plane. Also in the PowerPoint, we talked about how the frontal bone is front facing, but the temporal bones turn to face the lateral faces of the face, or the sagittal planes of the face sides. So we also want to prevent that brow from looking too wide by showing that value shift. To suggest that transition from frontal plane to sagittal planes. There are large muscles called the that sit on either side of the temple, that when they flex, they sort of fill out the sides of the head If someone's yawning, those shapes can kind of hollow out a little bit more. But Justin's jaw is fairly closed here, and so we see that contrast or that shift a little bit more subtly. Nonetheless, you do still see a transition from the frontal plane to the side or sagital planes on his face. All right. Now the bottom edge of that frontal bone really becomes what we sort of recognize as that structure behind our eyebrows, kind of defining that upper part of the eye socket. Something really to look at, going to be in terms of that arch and shape of the bottom of that frontal bone that varies a lot from person to person. Even more so how the eyebrows sit on top or are supported by that frontal bone varies from person to person. We talked about this in the PowerPoint, but you might see certain people's eyebrows rise above that bony landmark, in which case you get some brightness underneath the eyebrow. You might see eyebrows kind of drop below, which makes the eyes really feel like they sit in a deeper shadowy spot. And you know, Justin's run pretty close to in line with the bony landmark, and why we know that is just below the eyebrow is exactly where that transition from kind of bright plane to darker socket shape is. So that's sort of what we're going to look for and start defining. We can look at the bottom edge of his eyebrow to help us define that socket shape. If I pull a straight line across, I see at the outside his brows are lifting just above that nason line, so I'm going to get that established. Okay, eyebrows are just hugely important in terms of recognition of your subject. So look very closely in terms of their shape, look at their value or how much they contrast the skin tone, how dark they are. Look at how full they are. Take time with their shape and placement. And then of course, look carefully for how they are relating to the structure. Okay. All right, so next, placement of the eyes. That'll be in the next video.